Let's dive into something pretty big that's been all over the news lately. China's role in this whole climate change situation.
Yeah.
We've got these two articles we're looking at, one from the Economic Times
Okay.
about how China's emissions are kind of shaking things up in climate politics, and then another one from Climate Home News
Right.
that's ringing the alarm bells about China's coal boom
Yeah.
and how that's affecting hitting that 1.5 degrees Celsius target everyone's talking about.
Uh-huh.
So we're going to break these down and hopefully help everyone listening make sense of what's going on in this whole global climate puzzle, you know?
Pretty big one. It is a puzzle with some really high stakes.
Yeah, for sure. And one of the first things that really jumped out at me was from that Economic Times piece.
Yeah.
China, they've officially passed Europe as the second largest historical emitter
Wow.
of greenhouse gases.
Hmm.
Only the U.S. is ahead of them.
Yeah, it's a big development, It's, for the longest time, all eyes were on the U.S. and Europe as the big climate change culprits.
Yeah, right.
But China's been industrializing so fast over the past few decades.
Yeah.
The whole emissions landscape has really changed.
It's wild. And to really wrap your head around that change,
Yeah.
think about this. China built over 1,000 coal-fired power plants in just 30 years.
Wow.
That's like building 3 new power plants every month
Yeah.
for 30 years straight.
It's crazy.
It's just the scale of it's just mind-blowing.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
It really is.
I mean, it's that reliance on coal that's
Yeah.
really,
Yeah.
pushed them into this position.
Yeah.
But there is something important to note.
Okay.
Even though China's putting out the most emissions every year right now,
Mm-hmm.
the U.S. still has the top spot overall when you look at total historical emissions.
Right. And that makes sense if you think about it. The U.S. industrialized a lot earlier.
Yeah, yeah.
And so they've basically been emitting these greenhouse gases for longer. Right. Like they had a head start on filling the atmosphere with CO2.
Exactly, yeah. Like
Yeah.
a head start.
But this brings us to, to this really important point.
Right.
The whole idea of historical emissions.
Right. What does that even mean?
Yeah. So when we talk about historical emissions, we're not just looking at what's happening today.
Right.
We're talking about like the total amount of these greenhouse gases
Okay.
that a country has released over its entire history.
Uh-huh. Okay.
Think of it like, a bathtub filling up with water.
Okay. Yeah.
Even if you turn off the faucet, the water that's already in the pub that's still there,
Right.
it doesn't just disappear.
So you're saying like even emissions from way back when, like decades ago,
Yeah,
are still affecting how much the planet's warming up today.
exactly. Carbon dioxide, which is, a big one,
Yeah.
that gets released when we burn fossil fuels, that stuff can hang around in the atmosphere for centuries.
Wow.
It keeps trapping heat, and adding to this whole climate change problem.
So it's not just about who's emitting the most right now. It's about like who's contributed the most
Yeah,
to filling up that atmospheric bathtub, like you said.
exactly.
Exactly.
And this is where it gets even more interesting,
Yeah.
especially when you start thinking about the money side of climate action.
Yeah, absolutely. So you see, back in 1992, they set up this UN framework on climate change.
Right.
And they basically said, okay, developed nations like the U.S. and Europe, you guys are mainly responsible for giving climate finance.
Right.
So basically, money to help developing countries switch to cleaner energy and deal with the effects of climate change.
I see.
But they didn't include developing nations like China in that.
Because back then, China was still considered a developing nation, right?
Exactly.
Their economy was nowhere near as powerful as it is today.
Right. And that's exactly why this has become such a big sticking point in all the climate negotiations going on now.
Mm-hmm.
The developed nations are saying, hold on, things have changed.
Yeah. China's a major economic power now.
Right.
They need to step up and share the financial burden.
It's like they're saying, hey, the world's a different place than it was in 1992, and China can afford to help out more.
Exactly.
Yeah. But then what's China saying?
Well, China's pushing back, saying, look, we're still developing and we've got a huge population to take care of.
Yeah.
Plus, they're saying they are already giving quite a bit of climate finance and focusing on helping other developing countries.
So it's kind of a tense situation. Everyone agrees there's a problem, but no one can agree on who should pay for fixing it.
It's like a family arguing over the restaurant bill after a big meal.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's not just about this whole historical responsibility debate and the money fight.
Yeah.
There's another part of this story that makes things even more interesting.
Oh, absolutely. This is where it really starts to get complicated.
Yeah. So let's talk about what China's doing with clean energy. The Economic Times article highlights that China is actually leading the world when it comes to installing renewable energy and selling electric vehicles.
Mm-hmm.
They're adding clean energy at an incredible pace. It's actually pretty impressive.
Yeah, they are making some pretty big strides in clean energy, which is really important for everyone, to get off carbon.
Yeah.
But the deeper we go, you'll see why it's not that simple.
Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, it's almost like they're trying to do two completely different things when it comes to energy.
Yeah.
They're pushing for clean energy, but then, like that Climate Home News article said, there's this huge increase in coal power.
Right.
They added almost 50% more planned coal power capacity.
Wow.
In just the first 6 months of 2022.
Mm.
It's like they're hitting the gas and the brakes at the same time.
Mm.
How can those two things even work together?
Well, energy security is a big concern for them. Remember those power shortages they had in 2022?
Right.
Part of that was because of those heat waves and droughts, that messed with their hydropower.
Yeah.
Coal, they see it as this reliable way to keep the lights on.
Right.
Because they've got it right there.
Domestically.
So it's like a quick fix
Yeah.
for a real problem.
Right. But in the long run, it doesn't really fit with their clean energy goal.
Exactly. And that's what's got everyone worried. I mean, even if China manages to peak their emissions this decade like they're aiming for,
Yeah.
all these new coal plants could still have a huge impact
Oh, absolutely.
on global emissions and even cancel out the progress other countries are making.
Yeah. It's like you're trying to empty a bathtub,
Right.
but someone else keeps pouring more water in.
Yeah, exactly. It makes it way harder.
Yeah.
And speaking of making things harder, let's get back to that climate finance debate.
Yeah.
The Economic Times article, it really gets into the nitty-gritty of it all.
It does. It really highlights this fundamental tension in these climate negotiations.
Yeah. How do we get everyone to lower emissions
Right.
while still letting developing nations grow their economies?
It's a tough question.
Yeah.
You can't tell them to stop using fossil fuels when that's what they need to help people out of poverty.
Right.
But then you can't just ignore the impact of those emissions either.
Exactly. And that's why this climate finance thing is such a big deal.
Yeah.
The developed nations are saying, look, we shouldn't be the only ones paying for this transition to clean energy,
Right.
especially now that places like China have so much economic power.
They're basically saying we set up this system when China was still developing,
Yeah.
but things are different now and they should contribute more.
Right.
But then China says we're still dealing with our own development problems and we shouldn't have to pay as much as developed nations.
Right. And they also say they're already helping out other developing countries financially.
So it's kind of a stalemate.
Yeah, both sides are pretty dug in.
Are there any ideas out there for how to break through this?
Well, some people are saying we need to look at more than just total emissions.
Yeah.
Like, what about emissions per person?
Yeah.
Factoring in population size.
Right, because if you look at it that way, China's emissions actually look lower
Yeah.
than countries like the U.S., the EU, Japan, and Canada.
Right. So the total amount of emissions, it's not the whole story.
It really isn't.
Per capita emissions, they tell you more about how much a country's lifestyle and economy are contributing.
Yeah.
And then you have India.
Right.
They often bring up the energy needs of developing nations.
Basically saying we need to use more fossil fuels as we grow.
Yeah, their argument is that developed nations got to pollute their way to where they are now,
Yeah.
and developing nations should have that same chance.
It's a tough one, this whole fairness and historical responsibility thing.
It really is. But one thing's for sure, that old framework where developed nations do all the heavy lifting financially,
Yeah.
that's not going to work anymore.
No. So we've got this really messy situation with China. They're leading the way in renewables,
Yeah.
but also expanded coal power.
Right.
And stuck in this back and forth over climate finance.
Yeah.
But the Climate Home News article brought up another critical point, that 1.5 degrees Celsius target.
Right.
They're saying China's coal boom could really hurt global efforts
Oh, yeah.
to stay below that crucial threshold.
It's not just some random number.
Right.
Scientists have been warning us for years that going over 1.5 degrees of warming would be disastrous.
Yeah.
More extreme weather, rising sea levels, whole ecosystems collapsing.
So even if China's coal expansion is temporary, it could still have these long-term consequences.
Absolutely.
It makes it that much harder to avoid the worst of climate change.
It's like Like you're trying to win a race, but you've got a weight strapped to your ankle.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
Yeah, and that's why there's this real sense of urgency in these climate talks.
Yeah.
We're running out of time, and every new coal plant just makes it that much harder to hit that 1.5-degree target.
I mean, the IEA has been crystal clear. No new unabated coal plants if we want to keep warming below 1.5 degrees.
Right.
But China's still going ahead with their expansion.
Yeah.
It's got to be frustrating
I know, yeah.
for the other countries that are trying to lower their emissions.
Imagine working really hard towards a goal, making real progress, and then someone comes along and undermines everything you've done.
Yeah.
That's how a lot of countries are feeling right now.
Like taking a step back after they've been moving forward.
Exactly.
So where do we go from here? I mean, our listeners are probably thinking, this is complicated.
Well, the main thing is there's no easy answer here. China's role in this is complex. They're leading the way on clean energy, but they're also expanding coal power. It's a dilemma for the whole world.
Yeah, it's complicated. But we need to understand all this.
Oh, for sure.
If we want to have real conversations about climate action.
Absolutely. The more we understand what's going on, the better we can be at finding solutions that actually work and are fair to everyone.
That's a good point. So far, we've talked about China's emissions going up, the debates about who pays for climate action, the tension between their clean energy work and their coal boom, and how all of this affects hitting that 1.5-degree target.
A lot to take in.
It is, but hopefully people are starting to see just how big and complex this issue really is.
Yeah, and as we wrap things up, we wanted to leave you with something to think about.
Yeah, we've been focusing a lot on China here, but it makes you think, right?
Yeah.
Like, how do we get everyone to lower emissions, the whole world, while still giving developing countries a chance to grow their economies?
Yeah, exactly. It's not just about China, it's a global thing.
Right.
We need to figure out solutions that are innovative and where everyone works together.
We need to find ways for these countries to grow without making the same environmental mistakes as others did in the past.
Right. Economic growth can't come at the cost of trashing the planet.
And we can't just point fingers at China or any one country.
Right.
We're all connected, and the choices we make, every single one, they have a ripple effect.
Yeah.
It's not just governments and big companies, it's all of us.
Absolutely, yeah. China's emissions show us that. But it's true for everyone, What one country does affects everyone else.
So before we go, here's something to think about. What can you do personally to help create a more sustainable future? It doesn't have to be some big, grand gesture. It could be something small, like supporting policies for clean energy, being more mindful of what you buy, or even just talking about these issues with your friends and family.
Yeah, every little bit helps. If we work together, maybe, just maybe, we can find a way for people and the planet to both thrive.
Well said. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into China's climate situation. We hope you learned something new about how complicated it all is, and hopefully you feel like you can be a part of finding solutions.
Thanks for listening.
Thanks for listening.